definitely got plastered, and I can't even watch that game again. I used to try to watch Ohio State games a couple times, but it's just like, but it just seems like Ohio State is like, it's like, the doom and gloom. Like, there's all these questions. Can Ryan Day coach? Can Kerry Combs coach? Do you buy into all that, Mark? Are you worried about, as an Ohio State fan, just kind of take off your Mark Rogers hat, being the fan. I mean, are you worried about Ohio State? Do you think there's any truth to these things? Like, there's any meat to this? Or do you think they're just going to be, they're going to reload and it just was Trey Sermon got hurt, 2 interior linemen were out. Tommy Togi, I wasn't there. Guy was just a wrecker in the middle. Cam Brown went out thing. They were thin at defensive line. They lost 2 guys to legal issues. They were thin there all year. What's your take on that as far as Ohio State going forward?
Well, I think you have 3 basic components to any football program. It's more complicated than this, but to make it simple is that you got the talent, you recruit and sign the talent, then you develop them as players. You develop them, you teach them how to use their technique, how to become better route runners, their hand positioning on the field, everything that you do to develop them as players. And then number 3, you've got to go coach the game. You got to prepare for the opponent. You got to coach and instruct and build a game plan. And then during the game, you've got to be able to adjust to the situations on the field that you weren't expecting to win a football game and adjust in the moment. So there's no question that Ohio State's first rate and pretty much matches Alabama in the first category. I did a breakdown of all the recruiting rankings of all the 2 deep on each side, and Alabama might have had a tiny, 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 minuscule advantage that we don't even know is real because the recruiting rankings are obviously off by some measurement. So they've got the 2 best rosters in the country. Maybe Georgia's got an argument, but basically the 2 best rosters in the country. While I was watching that game, and it became obvious that Alabama was going to win the game, it brought to mind the Super Bowl that we saw a few years ago between the Patriots and Rams, Bill Belichick and Sean McVay. That Sean McVay is a tremendous, tremendous football coach and offensive mind, and he's, 37 years old. Ryan Day is 41 years old. That I believe it was just, this is the first time that Ryan Day went through this. And I'm not talking about a pandemic, everybody had to deal with that, but just how this pandemic might have affected Ohio State differently than other teams that were in that position. And that was the great debate as to whether it affected Ohio State more negatively than the other teams or benefited them more than the other teams. So we could debate that throughout history because there are pros and cons to both sides. But that while he did a masterful job preparing them for Clemson, then we never knew, or we could only speculate leading into the game how much that was going to affect them, that climb to the mountaintop and accomplishing what, even though they said all the right things about the championship being the championship, we know that they lost a brutal game to Clemson the year before. And the video that was shown over Justin Fields' shoulder while he was working out that was built into these documentaries and these hype videos of 29-23 against Clemson, those videos and those boards didn't say national championship. They said 29-23 Clemson. So I don't know how much that game took out of them, but I do think we all as fans overreact to one game. So just like Ohio State is not 21 points better than Clemson, Alabama's not 28 points better than Ohio State. They were on that night, but they were on that night. In both teams, I know as soon as I would run down Ohio State players that were missing from that game, Alabama people would run down the other side. And I know both sides, and I know who was missing, whether it was for just that specific game or for who was lost during the game, Wyatt Davis, Trey Sermon, or Devontae Smith, or who had been lost, as you mentioned, Cam Brown, weeks and weeks and months earlier that would have benefited the team. So anytime you bring up injuries, some people will just say, well, that's just an excuse because you got to play with whomever you've got. Well, that's true. But I think there's a balance. You can't just make that an excuse and say, well, we lost our best offensive lineman, running back, and our arguably best defensive tackle. Therefore, we didn't have our best team there. But on the other hand, it's a discussion point. It's valid. If Ohio State had all their two-deep roster, sprained ankles in the pregame warm-ups and had to play third stringers, well, that would be a discussion point. It's valid to talk about those things. But I think that on certain nights, certain teams show up, not because they tried harder, but it just worked. It just clicked. The matchups worked. Ohio State's dominance along both sides of the line of scrimmage against Clemson was something that they just grossly took advantage of that worked in their favor, versus that was a stalemate against Alabama. Therefore, Alabama's skill position players just terrorized Ohio State. And it's not an excuse. This is the one weakness that just really played into this Alabama game, was that when have you seen a worse Ohio State secondary? When has Ohio State fielded a worse secondary? I don't know that you can go back to 2012 or 13. I think even those secondaries were performed better than this one. I don't know if you got to go back
even 18. I mean, it was bad, but not this bad.
Yeah, and they showed at the end of the year that I think that was all scheme issue related generally in 18. And then when they simplified it against Michigan, Northwestern, and Washington, they played so much better that they finally figured it out and let them just go play football. I don't know when they've had worse play in the secondary. And then they were playing the worst team in the country to be that poor in the secondary.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, that was a matchup nightmare. With that receiving core of Alabama. But the other thing too is and I mean, I think the other thing too is that I watched really watched the Alabama Notre Dame game, and I mean, Alabama had an easy time in that game. I mean, they did not work. I mean, no game is easy, but it was, it really kind of reminded me of, and I remember watching that game and going back to last year, because, a lot of people, even the Clemson guys, even Dabo kind of hinted at it a little bit, when that basically the Ohio State game took so much out of Clemson, like two heavyweight fighters, and a poorly made Rocky movie, just, pounding the crap out of each other. And then it's like, you're diminished the next week. You're just not you're just not the same team anymore, because I mean, and obviously LSU, slid into the playoffs. I mean, when was OU was out of that game? 6 minutes in, and Notre Dame was out of that game before they took the field. And it was like it. And I think these battle with Clemson. I love that Clemson game. It was a great game, but I mean, just it just seems like last year Clemson just didn't look like the same team. It's like almost like a heavyweight boxer that got beat up a little too much, one too many times. It's just they didn't have that spark, because it's like Alabama and Ohio State, man, they swapped some paint. I mean, Clemson and Ohio State. I mean, there's bad blood out there, and those guys are really kind of landing on thick, and it's like, I just wonder, because I kind of felt the same way. It looked like, he's obviously, like you said, normally, Fred Venables would get 63 hung on him, and I don't think that LSU was that much better than a Clemson defense, but they were beat up, man, after playing Ohio State. I think it happened to Ohio State this year a little bit. I think they got, obviously, just the field injury, but just, wasted all that motion, like you said, all year. Every hype video had that, that Clemson scoreboard above, in the weight room. So I just wonder if they unloaded the gun and just a little too much against Clemson.
Yeah, and on the drive that Garrett Wilson scored a touchdown to make it 38-24, when it looked like I didn't think that they were going to come back and win, but you get within two scores. you know, and there was still a ton of time left. On that particular drive, they actually called 2 design runs for Justin Fields. I think they were the first 2 of the game, and he got loose on one of them. He had a nice gain on one, but the other one he got loose for 35 or 40 yards. And I thought, again, it was similar to watching him play against Clemson the year before, and I thought it would have been nice to have seen a fully healthy Justin Fields because that would have been a component to the offense that they didn't have.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a no-brainer. The kid's going to be a high first-round pick or middle first-round pick, most likely, like, second or third guy coming off the board, So it's like, I feel a little zipped as an Ohio State fan. We never got to see, like, a healthy Justin Fields in the most important games. There's always, what could he have done if he was, the guy that can, just where it's just going to destroy you in RPO, and he's, the guy that basically, ran Trey Sermon down from behind and made up a lot for him for his first touchdown from the year. I mean, literally, ran a running back down, easily from behind and caught him. Got in front of him, made a block. I mean, it's like if that kid could have played, like you said, last year and this year, it just, amazing what it could have been. I know he was pressing a lot. He was trying to win the Heisman Trophy, the national championship, but he seemed to got that out of him after Indiana. He settled down, and it's like it's just but then he gets hurt again. Yeah, I just wonder what it seems like a lot of times with Ohio State, you wonder what could have been. Obviously, we don't lose to Michigan State in 15. We don't, but it seems like we just have a. I want to call it luck or, just, bad breaks. But, yeah, I definitely agree. But I'll jump off here, Mark. I know you probably got a lot of other callers out here. Thanks for talking to me. And keep up the great work, man. I love what you do. So.